go, here we 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 go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Containers from the Couch. I am Justin Garrison, and today I am joined by Ashrat, who is going to show us some really cool tools to make sure that your Kubernetes clusters are secure in some ways, or at least verify that these benchmarks and the CIS benchmarks can be run on a cluster. So I'm really excited. Thank you so much for joining me. Can you tell us about what you do and where you're from?
My name is Ashrat Nir. I'm from ARMO. I am the developer advocate for Kubescape and ARMO.
Sweet. And I know many people that have seen the show probably have heard us talk about Kubescape in the past. I could have sworn we had a show with Kubescape in the past, but I couldn't find it in our backlog. So maybe this is the first, but if anyone else has been using it, let us know in the comments, because I've known about it for a long time, and I swear we did a show, but apparently not. So welcome to Containers from the Couch, and let's just go over a little bit on what Kubescape is and what ARMO is and how that all fits together as like a product here. And in general, Kubescape is running scanning for your clusters. Is that right?
Well, it started off as a Kubernetes scanner, a compliance scanner, and it came out built right on the heels of the NSA CISA compliance that came out in 2021. Maybe. Don't remember. It's been a long time.
2020s have been a blur. It's fine.
That is true. COVID. But it has grown and changed a lot. Today, we'll be talking about compliance. We'll be talking about the CIS benchmark. However, Kubescape now also provides vulnerability scanning as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and I'm really excited to see how some of that works. Anyone else that's following along and wants to, try it out, Kubescape is open source. You can check it out on GitHub. Go download it and run it, right? Like there's no requirements, no signups, nothing you need to just try this out on a local cluster, a dev cluster, something else that you're running. You want to see how it works for yourself.
Correct. Give it a try. Let us know what you think, because we're always tweaking and changing it. And of course, anybody who wants to join the community is more than welcome.
Cool. And is Kubescape part of the CNCF landscape?
Kubescape is currently a CNCF sandbox project. We are now working on getting to incubation. We plan on getting it into incubation in 2024. It's been a sandbox project for a year now, since early 2023.
And now that I think about it, I don't know that we've ever even on the show talked about how those levels of projects at the CNCF work, because when you're brought in as a sandbox project. You need a sponsor to basically get you in. Is like, hey, here we think this is good for the community. It should be part of this landscape as a whole. And there's these levels of sandbox, incubating, something, and then graduated. I don't remember the middle.
I don't think there's anything between incubation and
is it just incubation and graduated? Okay, maybe I was thinking too much into it. But yeah, there are definitely different levels of projects on how not necessarily how mature they are, but how much adoption and how integrated they are into the rest of the industry and the landscape.
I think what made Kubescape special here and kind of gave it a leg up is that we were the first security scanner for Kubernetes, and basically the only thing Kubescape does is Kubernetes. It's not. It doesn't do security for cloud. We're specifically around Kubernetes.
Cool. And how does ARMO tie into Kubescape and what you do?
So ARMO developed Kubescape, first of all, and then donated it to the CNCF Foundation. Basically what we did was we built a commercial SaaS product over Kubescape. I have slides later on to show kind of how Kubescape is an engine, and basically it's the engine behind ARMO. That being said, in order to be part of the CNCF landscape, we needed to decouple it, and we will be, and basically the idea is that can be plugged in to, let's say, Backstage, for instance, or other things. And we are also planning a very rudimentary UI so that people can see dashboards and things of that effect.
Cool. And actually, as you mentioned, let's jump into those slides you have, because that I know we'll go over a few of these things in a little more detail so we can get a better picture of it. There it is.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, again, as we said, Kubescape started life as a compliance scanner due to the NSA and the executive order that came out of that and things like that. So of course we check compliance benchmarks. How do we do that? We create, based on those compliance benchmarks, what we do is we create security controls written in Rego using OPA. Open Policy Agent. Again, we live and breathe the open source community, but we're also now looking at Kubernetes configurations and vulnerability assessments. There is some work around RBAC and workload configurations as well. So basically, the idea is to bring all of the Kubernetes security needs from the far left all the way to the right these days, because we are now using eBPF to check out runtime in order to help prioritize vulnerabilities most of the time, but not only. And the idea is that you can put Kubescape in many places along that left to right continuum. Including CI/CD, including plugins for VS Code, including a GitHub action. So there's a lot of stuff in order to bring security into the DevOps stack rather than make it something outside of the DevOps stack, because we know that DevOps and security sometimes butt heads, and we want to make that a better experience for everybody. And of course, security. People tend to not think about it or tend to push it away because it is hard. It may be considered boring. It may be considered difficult. So what we want to do is integrate that into the day-to-day workflow in order to keep everything secure from the beginning to the end, and then continuously secure it as it lives in production.
And that security is not a spectrum, but there's a range of places where people hook in and say, this is the part we want to be secure. And that can be during development. It can be during your CI/CD. It can be in your container registry, and it can be at like the node level and runtime level. Correct. And even generally in the cluster itself with other things that are just happening with cluster level, like access, RBAC, and network policies.
Correct.
Where's the coverage that Kubescape is providing for those things?
So again, if you're looking at compliance, then basically we're all over the place. I mean, we can plug it into VS Code, and as you're writing, you will get, as you're writing your YAMLs, you will get the information that you need to tweak this or change that. And then in the CI/CD pipeline, you can put security gates wherever it recommended and stop a pipeline if you're out of compliance. We have a concept of percentage of compliance, which means that you can even say, if this is, I don't know, 90% sys compliance, then I'll let it through. But if it's 75% sys compliance, I'll stop. Or you can indicate a specific control that if it fails, you will not continue your pipeline. You have to fix it then. Mm-hmm.
Does it also do, so I have my pipeline, I can scan there if I'm going to push or not. Does Kubescape do like container registry scanning as well for like image scanning after the fact for artifacts?
Yes.
So I can check it before and then 6 months later, no one's pushed that image. I need to see if I'm vulnerable to something. I can then go out and say, oh, this is the new CVE that's out. Let's go ahead and scan that registry and make sure that all those images are up to date or not vulnerable to the problem.
Correct. And of course, there's this concept of continuous scanning, even in production, because CVEs come out every day. And you want to, and you can't kind of say, okay, it's production, it's fine, because you want production to be as safe as possible and all the way back. So yeah, you can time the scans and put them, and check everything all the way through.
Cool.
Okay, so as we said, Kubescape's here to tell you what's wrong in your clusters and your registries and your YAML and your help charts. Wow, we should have been on this slide before.
I just jumped ahead. I'm sorry. I was
No, not a problem. It's great. And more importantly, it tells you how to fix and prioritize your issues. And we're doubling down on that. I mean, there's a lot of planning in order to how we think about fixes in relation to runtime, because if we're talking about benchmarks, let's go back to CIS, which is our basically this topic, is they're very academic, I guess would be a right word to say, because they have there are best practices, and these are smart people putting together good ideas. The thing is that they have no context. And the context of runtime is really, really important in order to see what you're fixing and what you're fixing first, and whether your fix will break your application. So these are all things that you need to figure out, the fires you need to run to, and then the fires that you can walk to, and whether or not you will break your application when you make a fix, or if you need to mitigate it somewhere else.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, man, years ago, I read the CI, like I read it start to finish, like one of the like hardening images or whatever. And it was very academic, and it was very best case scenario, like theoretical, where it was like, hey, if everything is exactly right, if you don't need to use this system, this is how you should set it up. and once you have someone that some of those things are like, okay, is this, you have a trade-off, and do I want to use this or not? And like, you have to make that decision of, you cannot be 100% CIS compliance and also have a functioning company built around a thing. A lot of times it's like, hey, this is what we think you should do in every case if it's possible. Here's the real world where developers are writing code that they are figuring out how it works, and they're making things work, and they're innovating on new things, and they are trying new things with new APIs that didn't exist with an LLM last year, right? Like, these are all things that are like, these standards and benchmarks move slowly. They have to, because they have to understand the landscape, they have to understand the risks, and so what you're reading today for a CIS, for a CIS benchmark, was written, earlier this year or last year, and you're not necessarily up to date with, hey, I can apply that thing to the new model. It just doesn't work that way. But yeah, it's definitely having a tool to, I like that prioritization aspect, where it's like, hey, not all of these requirements or suggestions are equal, and you need to decide which ones are right for you.
Right. And I think the most simplistic example I always give to lay people is, you want a cluster to be safe, don't let it connect to anything. But how can you, but it won't work, right? So you've got to have ingress, and you have to keep it safe, because that's just the way it works.
It's like, if you want to be a, like, there's an ideals like driver, if you're driving a car, right? Like, hey, you are always, 10 in 2 hands, these mirrors. So like, the safest car is the one that's parked in my garage, right? Like, that's the one that's like, it's not moving, and it's, it's theoretically, it's not going to get hit by another car. It is possible, but most likely it is safe to sit in that car.
Yeah, correct. So a little bit more about Kubescape is that it gathers data from, it gathers data from the CLI and from the operator. So basically, there's this whole conversation about agentless or agent full, I guess is the opposite. But with an agent or without an agent, we offer both solutions. We highly suggest using the operator, just because you got to know what's going on inside the cluster in order to get that context that you need in order to make your decisions. Because if you're only looking from outside in, you're missing a lot. And that data that's gathered can then be sent either to a dedicated UI to the Cube API, to Backstage. With Kubescape, it's sort of headless. So you have to take care of where that information goes. You have to gather that in order to see trends and things like that. What ARMO did was built ahead for Kubescape in order to kind of share the data, save the data, and do all sorts of, additional thinking and processing of that in order to turn raw data into information.
Mm-hmm. And that is a common pattern with a lot of things Kubernetes, where there's a command line version. You can try it, but if you're going to like deploy this to someone that's not a Kubernetes expert or someone that wants to see it and integrate with that information, it's going to be a lot easier to have an API that's defined for it and is visible for them to like, oh, I can pull up the dashboard, right? It's like, I'm not going to send my like a bash script to my manager necessarily. I'm just like, hey, like, here's what I do to look at the data. Here's how you can see the data too. You're going to want to have some of that split of like someone deep in the weeds that understands it and is creating the dashboards and getting that information, and someone that wants to make a decision based on it. Like, I don't need to know the details, just help me make that decision.
Yeah. Having said that, we do have users of Kubescape that build Grafana dashboards, and they work off of that, which is fine because, because this is the world we live in, and people like to build things. So let's talk a little about controls and frameworks. Okay. So a control will test for a single problem or concern. If you've read the CIS benchmark, it's kind of a lot. And there are many problems that need to be addressed. And frameworks like the CIS benchmark are a batch of controls. And Kubescape itself supports over 5 frameworks. And I think I last checked today, we have 226 controls, which is possibly the largest library of security controls available in the market today, or in the open source today, because it's all in the Kubescape repo, and you can just go there and see if you read Rego.
And everything is, all the controls are in Rego for anyone that's okay.
Yeah. And actually, we did a neat experiment last year, which may even kind of come back to us at a moment. It kind of as AI matures, but we used GPT 3.5, if I'm not mistaken, and in order to generate Rego controls. It's like you kind of say the problem, and then you generate the controls. It was very immature at the time, but I'm pretty sure that with the advent of AI, and last KubeCon was AI, all about AI. So I'm pretty sure that this will come back at some point, when it's a little more mature and we can count on it.
Cool. Yeah, and for anyone that's not familiar, Rego is a DSL, domain specific language that came out of Open Policy Agent for writing policies. And there's been some other languages that write policies. I know HashiCorp has Sentinel, which is its own like HCL formats. There's a couple of different ones out there that are just like, hey, we need to somehow define a policy, and you don't necessarily want fully multi-purpose code to do it, because that's a little too flexible sometimes and often harder to author for people, where if you can scope down what the language does, and you can also tie in things like that aren't easy to do in code, where it's like, oh, no deploys on Friday. Like, that's the common, like, hey, is today Friday? Let's check, is it Friday? And like, if you want to do that in Python, it's like, well, what time zone are you in? And once you go into time zones, you're like, oh, you know what? Like, never mind. We'll just forget forget I said anything. This is too difficult. Yeah. So Rego definitely, it collapses some of that like general purpose, like, hey, let's just write a language for policies and figure out how we apply those and then author those. And then also in the case of Kubescape, make controls that allow you to like validate if that is right or wrong or available or not.
And another neat experiment that we did lately was when, oh gosh, it was last year. So it was 3 Kubernetes versions ago, maybe 126, where CLI came out, kind of came into vogue. So we translated a lot of the controls into CLI as well, in order to kind of support that trend as well, to see how it works and what the adoption is, and be ready for that.
Nice.
So yeah, Kubescape is ready for CLI as well.
Cool.
So a control, as we mentioned, tests a single aspect of a resource and gives severity. And there are tons of examples, and we'll actually show the explanations of real controls later on, I guess. This is just kind of something we did in research just for the fun of it, I guess, to see which are the most failed controls in the general population. And we can see down here many of them. Non-root container is a scary one. But even with CIS, you can see that you have apply security context and apply SecOp profile, which are things that get forgotten, actually. So it's really, really good that this stuff is embedded in the process so as not to forget it. I think that's enough with the slides.
Well, I think like as you move on that spectrum of like the things that get alerted on a lot are the things that have a lot more unknowns, right? It's like if I change my file system to read only, I don't know what's going to break necessarily, right? Like it's like, actually, I might write something to dist at some points, and that's a hard thing to do. So like the things that get alerted less are like, hey, you know what? I can just test this real quick. It's kind of a small scope thing, but yeah, like resource limits, people are like, I don't know what testing and figuring out your resources is a hard problem, and figuring out like what resource limits do I want? It's like, what are the downsides if I do this wrong? Oh, guess what? The app's going to crash, right? Like those are problems that people have to figure out. And same like non-root containers. Like, I don't know, like, do I want to create a user, and how does that interact with the files? And do I need to chown a bunch of stuff? Like, how does this work? Those are all harder problems as there's more things on that list. So that's really fascinating, just seeing that, where you can just see like, yeah, this is where it gets difficult, and there's more things that adjusting this flag is going to affect, and you need to know what it's doing and what your app is doing. A lot of times people just don't.
Exactly. I mean, you build something to do something, and there's little to no awareness around kind of the effects. I mean, you have dependencies and whatever, but then starting to try to figure those out can get hairy.
Yeah. So you said you want to jump over to demo?
Yeah, let's.
All right, let's get that going. You can make that a little bit bigger. I don't know if everyone else can see it okay, but I make my window kind of small so that I can try to just make the text bigger if you can. No, that was actually worse.
Oh, that's worse. Okay, one sec. Oh gosh, how do I make the text bigger?
Do a Control Plus.
Control Plus.
Control Shift Dash or Control Plus. There you go.
Oh, there, Control Plus worked. Okay, so PowerShell. We're now going to look at Kubescape in the CLI. And after that, we might jump over to ARMO just to see how it manifests itself when it has a head, I guess. I want to do a regular CIS scan first, just to see how that works. So we'll do that. I have an EKS cluster up and running. So we're checking on an EKS cluster. What's important to say here is we also check the cluster. So if, for instance, you're running an EKS cluster and you decide to scan with all the controls, we will help by not running, let's say, sys for AKS, because it's not relevant. Okay, so what we have here.
Questions already, actually.
Okay.
Who maintains that framework? Is that something that you constantly have someone like translating whatever the control is and updating those in the framework? So I saw you had versions on the framework, right? So I can target a very specific version for whatever I'm trying to do, right? If I have a compliance problem, like, oh, you know what, we have to be this version compliance, then I got to go back to that one. So are you maintaining those? Is that something that's community run? Is that something that's like generally available that's the NSA puts out there?
No, the project writes the control. We're mostly at the moment maintained by ARMO, but we do have contributors that are outside of ARMO. And yeah, I mean, before I worked at ARMO, I worked for a managed Kubernetes provider, and every time a new version came out, somebody was reading the sys benchmarks and making sure that that stuff was compliant.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. Every time a new version comes out, we have a read and we make the tweaks as necessary, or additions, subtractions, etc.
Yeah.
So what we have here are the controls and whether there are failed resources and how out of how many. So here it's 4 out of 4, and here it's 1 out of 17, and that really helps us with the percentage. And if I were to run the EKS one, we can see that it's smaller because the CIS benchmark for EKS is smaller.
The first one was a generic Kubernetes.
Yeah,
benchmark.
it was. Yeah. Okay, it's thinking. You can see that we have account configurations in Kubernetes, and so now we can see, for instance, here we have 35% compliance on this control. Here we have 80% compliance on this control, and this kind of goes to where we put this in the security gates of do we fail the pipeline and at what percentage. So that
And
really
this is
helps.
this is scanning a live cluster though, right? This isn't a pipeline scan here.
No, this is a live cluster. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And
you could do this same thing to the manifests as it's going through CI/CD.
Correct. And now if I were just to do a generic scan in general, it'll bring me, the defaults are NSA and MITRE. So that's interesting as well because you get a lot of information there. And it takes a little longer because these are more controls. But you can also see that once you get your results, you get a compliance score, which is this. And you also get the what now. Because the problem with scanners, for the most part, is that they spew out a ton of data. And it's like,
and all of it's red and all of it says you're doing terrible.
Exactly. And it's like, okay, I'm just gonna go get some coffee because I can't deal with this. And then, context switch and you're done, and no security work has been done. So what we want to do is really, really help people and users and walk them through what needs to happen. And now I wonder if I can share ARMO. Did it change out?
No, I see your PowerShell still. We can.
Okay, so let's go back and solve this.
If we want to, we can. Here, let me pull out the screen. You can share the browser.
Stop the screen and I'll present. Yeah. Share screen, and I will share this. Okay, so now you can see it, right? Because I can see that I'm sharing.
Yep, there it goes. You might want to make that bigger too. It's hard to read.
Okay, this makes it smaller. This is bigger. Yeah, is that better?
One more.
One more. Okay. So this is my cluster, and this shows that it's connected, which means that I'm running the operator as well as the CLI. And of course, I have to have the operator in order to push the data into the SAS. And if I dive into my cluster, what I can see is that I have a compliance of 31% with CIS EKS, and 50% with the regular CIS, and 88% overall, which is, I don't know, I guess it depends on the organization and what they need, right?
This is for a small startup. This is probably great. For a bank, maybe not. This is again, it's all risk profiles. Yeah.
Yeah. So if I go, and then I can choose the profile that I want to dive into. So here I'm looking at the 31%, which means that I have 24 controls failed on 372 resources. And then it tells me what happened, what's wrong. And then I can decide what I'm going to do with it. And this went too big, so I'm going to have to go a little bit smaller here just to show that there's also the suggested fix. So if in the CLI, it also showed you that you could kind of dive deeper into the specific failed control. Here you can do it as well. And the nice thing about ARMO is that you also get side-by-side remediation and all of that. But since this is a Kubescape thing, I won't do it in ARMO demo. But what I would like to show is a little bit about how the frameworks and the controls are built. So basically, we support 8 frameworks, and but you can build your own, and you can just and again, this is for Kubescape as well, and on the CLI, you can build your own framework. You can take any controls, any set of controls that you want that work for you, and just build something in. So if you're, for instance, if you're doing a SOC 2 compliance at the moment, you can check which controls already exist in the library that are applicable to your compliance, and bunch those into a framework so that you can run that for the audit. Now, if we were to look at control,
is it possible to create a framework from an existing framework? Like, could I fork the CIS EKS and just add or remove certain controls that I want to, because it starting from scratch is a lot more, a lot more there's.
But it's not really starting. It's not really starting from scratch because you're choosing from a library of controls. As for your question, I actually don't really know.
I just think that'd be a cool feature. Hey, fork this framework, right? And just immediately say here's the controls we already have. I'm going to clone that to a new framework with all the same controls in it, and then we can add some or remove some as needed to make it, Justin's company CIS, adjusted or something like that, so that I can know, oh, you know what, we don't actually do that here for whatever reason, so I don't have to see the failure all the time. I just know that it's something that we don't do.
Okay, so something you can do is set a control that exists in a framework to ignore because it's not relevant to you. So that's kind of the other side of it, and I think
I don't need to fork the framework. Yeah,
exactly. It actually saves toil. And then we've got controls. So basically, 226 last count. You can see which frameworks are related to it and their severity. And you can dive into controls. Now, there are some configurable controls, and let's kind of narrow this down into EKS. There are 2 configurable controls on EKS. One is you can choose which public registries you want to use, and you can block certain public registries as well. So that's one of them. And the other one is, again, allow listing a repo for a public registry. So basically, that's how it works, and those are the frameworks and the controls.
That registry one's a really interesting example because we had a show not long ago where we were showing people how to set up a container registry caching pull-through cache with ECR, because the Kubernetes upstream repositories were changing, and we wanted to make sure that people could cache those images locally. And so you can still say you can only pull from ECR repos, but here's the path that you can get to the upstream container images, because we cache those into ECR, and those are all settings that you can configure. And then you can block someone that ever says, I want the registry.kates.io registry. No, that's not allowed. Use this, the one that we have cached instead. And that's a great example of just helping people do the right thing, and that not only is more performant for you, it's better for the community. It's a lot of benefits on hey, let's just use the one that we're caching and we set up and we can control, rather than someone publicly available. They just publish something on GitHub or Docker Hub or whatnot.
Correct. Okay, I am going to stop sharing, or you have to stop sharing.
There you go.
And I guess that's the bare bones of it. And if there are any additional things that we want to discuss.
So I had a question about the command line interface for Kubescape. If you're running the scans, I'm assuming the scans and the frameworks, are they stored as CRDs inside the cluster? Do you know? Is that something that's how does it get that information? Where's that? It's not coming from my local folder of or install, right? Because multiple people can run Kubescape against the cluster. Is that right?
I actually don't know how to answer that question, but I do know that the scan results are now saved as CRDs in order to help with kind of the output.
Okay.
Um,
Because I would
but
assume, yeah. I mean, do you have kube control set up in PowerShell, or is that not set up on that machine? It's fine if not. It was just kind of it was something I was curious in.
we can try
That's just,
if
yeah. That's always the
if we're
fun
up.
of doing things live and
Yeah,
having a conversation
exactly.
about it.
I don't know. Let's give it a try. What do we want to check?
Go ahead and share the PowerShell window again,
Okay, I'll share the PowerShell window
and
again.
we'll see if it works. I don't know. I'm curious now
Okay.
because like I said, we haven't done a stream on this before, and I haven't looked at it. So
Window. There we go. Okay, so
see if kube control. I'm assuming kube control cluster-info works. Like that should just tell us that you're connected to the cluster. If Kubescape was working, I'm assuming kube control works. One word, no space. There you go.
yeah, sorry. It's late in
No
Israel.
problem.
It's thinking. Nope.
Okay.
Let's not go into debugging at the moment.
That's fine. I was just curious. Yeah. Oh no, it did connect. Cool. Wonder what the error was before. If you do kube control get CRDs, that's the only thing that I was curious, because that'll just show us what's there. We don't have to dig into it. It was just kind of a thought that I had. It's probably gonna have a lot if you install the operator. Usually operators just come with, oh no,
No, just
CNI security. Okay, interesting. All right, I was curious because I was wondering where it stores that information. I'm wondering how that interacts and how like a team would use this, if they're using just the CLI versus ARMO as like a hosted dashboard for it. So definitely something that I would want to dig more into and figure out how that works. Cool. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to show us. I like that you can have that flexibility of like controls and frameworks, and they're separate, and you can just build those together to apply which ones you want and configure them how you need. So it's not always just, hey, guess what? Non-compliant. I was like, yeah, I might know. I might know that if you're applying everything.
What does that even mean? Yeah.
You have to make some decisions for yourself. So
exactly.
So thanks everyone for watching, and feel free to check out Kubescape. Kubescape, again, it's open source. You can just go try it on a cluster, figure out if it works for you, and start playing with the frameworks and controls and see what it is you're trying to scan, what you're trying to check. And I like that it also fits in that entire pipeline of manifest files and CI/CD all the way to a live cluster. So,
and if you have any questions, of course, Kubescape.io has all our contact info. But we exist on X, which is used to be Twitter, and we have a channel on CNCF Slack. So if you have any questions or you get stuck on something, we're happy to help.
That's what that was the next thing I was going to ask, is where should they reach out? So Slack, the CNCF Slack is the right place for that. Cool.
Correct. There's a Kubescape channel, and feel free to reach out to us.
Wonderful. All right. Well, thanks everyone for joining, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for having me, Justin. This was great.
Yeah.